Bob Fletcher, welcome to the Prophecy Club.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. I really appreciate it, and give me the opportunity to share some amazing information that I have ended up falling into, as I say, so to speak. What had taken place very briefly in my life situation, I had a business, and I merged it with another corporation, actually. They were both corporations, and it was a toy manufacturing business. And this is way back in the 80s. And lo and behold, after putting the agreements together to merge and actually move together and all the rest of that, after a short period of time, I realized that the people that I had merged with were actually suppliers of weapons for international covert operations right straight out of the Pentagon, right out of the White House. And, of course, at that time, it turned out to be directly involved with what was called the Iran-Contra expose, or the Iran-Contra problem, which was, of course, drugs and exchange for weapons and secret agents creating and running the war in Nicaragua and involved with Iran missiles and all the rest of that. Way beyond my imagination, and they actually tried to recruit myself to function full-time as a courier of information.
Okay, so you're just this common guy, right? And all of a sudden you wind up in the middle of something that's not just national but international, and you ran into some very influential people, some very evil in high places, right?
Well, it went right up to the White House. And so from that, within a short period of time of myself realizing and actually having them just sit down with me and say, here's what we want you to do. And that was to become a courier for these covert operations back and forth. And they wanted me to go to Angola, which was about to be their next targeted, let's say, a small war. All these wars that we always watch and we see, we don't even understand how we got into them. These are the guys that actually, straight out of the National Security Council and the Central Intelligence Agency, supply the weapons, etc., for all of these unbelievable wars. And, of course, they make millions and millions on their own for their own pockets on the side. And they're permitted to do that as long as they accomplish what was to be done politically out of the White House. As long as they're doing that, they are simply able to stamp these operations top secret, and nobody ever gets to look or even investigate or even go to court on any of these. So that's how I got started, and it's much more. It's an amazing story. We'll put that on the back shelf because we have a lot to cover.
Okay, so how did you get into Planet X?
Okay, so I had that was way back in the 80s, and I became a federal witness, actually, and involved with as many as 8 or 9 different major congressional investigations and inquiries at the highest level. I actually testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee, et cetera, And the reason that I ended up being dragged back every couple of months or every 6 months or so into a new investigation was because so many of these people overlapped. So it was it was the same people, a few people here, a few people there, and then I would get a call from a congressman or a senator or somebody that was doing something, a major investigation, and they would say, Bob, do you have anything on this or do you have anything on that? So I had gotten used to watching and following and actually investigating huge amounts of money, vanishing money. In other words, fraudulent, the money disappearing, let's say, out of a covert budget, which, of course, nobody ever knows about anyhow because it's covert, and then legitimate budgeting of scientific things, let's say, like space programs, and they would steal millions of dollars out of, let's say, a billion-dollar contract, and maybe a third of it would disappear into someplace else. And I started about 3 years ago looking into huge amounts of money that were vanishing. But this was not the regular, like I say, multi-millions that I was used to looking at and chasing, so to speak. The money had moved up to be where it was billions and even trillions of vanished dollars just disappearing into the air. And one of the big points was back the day before the 9/11 occurrence, the day before the 9/11 event in New York and Washington.
I can't wait to hear this.
Okay. Literally the day before, Donald Rumsfeld, the head of the Department of Defense at that time, was speaking and testifying before the Congress. And in the midst of it, he said that we have discovered over the last few years, I think he was referring to maybe 10 years or so, that I believe now the number was 2.3 trillion had disappeared from the defense budget. Now we're talking with a T, $1 trillion. Holy mackerel, I was overwhelmed. I couldn't believe it. And again, I was used to hearing, 16 million or 14 billion or 2 billion or 14 million disappearing. But when you get into trillions, because you cannot, if you were a thief, the best thief in the world, or a drug smuggler or an arms dealer, you cannot money launder.
Right, you can't hide that much. You can't hide it.
Simply hide it. Right. So then, of course, what happened, see, now the timing is important. The 9/11 event took place. That was the end of it. We never heard anything about any other news on the face of the earth for the next 6 months because of course, the outrageous 3,000 dead Americans in the 9/11 event. And so I don't want to get into that because that's another story. But the bottom line was, because of the day before being the date of that announcement, that was the end of it. Nobody ever even followed it up. A short time later, the woman that was in charge of some of the monetary funding out of the Federal Reserve, kind of overseer, so to speak, of the funds out of the Federal Reserve, she was asked by a congressman on an inquiry on another, as a matter of fact, some other financial problems they were having. She was asked, what was the story about $9 trillion vanishing off of the books of the Federal Reserve System? Well, now that's our money. They don't let us look at it, and they don't tell us anything about it, but the Federal Reserve basically is our money. They are the ones in charge of printing it, and they are the ones that are in charge of, now here's the important part, the gold of Fort Knox. They're the ones that oversee, supposedly, the gold in Fort Knox. So around in the same period of time, I realized that a friend of the average American, Mr. Ron Paul, at the congressional senatorial level, had requested a audit of the by the Federal Reserve of the gold at Fort Knox. He wanted to know, because there were so many stories and rumors about the which is the truth, that the fact that the gold is no longer there, that all the gold of Fort Knox is gone. Now, when I say all the gold, let's say we're just talking maybe 90% or 95%. There's always a little bit there someplace that could be looked at. But the bottom line is, the way the Federal Reserve was created, very intentionally, and a lot of people don't realize this, the Federal Reserve has nothing to do with the United States government in an official capacity. The Federal Reserve is a group of private banks that oversees the adjustment of interest on loans with the Federal Reserve funds and also oversees the gold. But what they did was they created it with the very specific wording that says basically that there is no oversight by any congressional or senatorial or any elected officials of the United States government. They have no right to even ask for an audit. If they give you an audit, it is the mercy of their being good guys. In other words, if we get an audit on the gold, which was done, matter of fact, way back in the 70s one time, and it was a joke. The audit that they did was completely laughable. They permitted a few people to look at one part of a building that constituted like let's say like a typical one-size bedroom filled with gold bars, and that was the extent of the audit. So the truth was, even back in the 70s, when everybody got excited about that, we really found out nothing. We have no idea. The gold could have been disappearing way back then. But as we stand today, there's absolutely no gold left in Fort Knox. There's absolutely no gold left in Fort Knox. Because when I add to it, not only did we have audits requested by Senate and congressional people who were told to go away, period. But then during the 2008, 2010, and 11 period of time, when in fact we had the world financial banking crunch and everybody was very upset because entire nations were on the border of bankruptcy because of the money situation, the German government and 4 other nations came forward and came to the Federal Reserve and said, we need some of our own gold back out of the Fort Knox. We need to get some of ours out. Now, to explain that briefly is that the world gold, all of the nations of the world actually have billions and billions of gold bars in deposit at the Fort Knox. because they were worried about their own country, let's say like Germany, having a corrupted government come up again like the old Nazi regime, and that they were worried about their gold. So many, almost every nation of the world has billions and billions of gold bars on deposit physically in the United States Fort Knox. When these 5 countries came forward and said, we are in need of our actual physical gold, we have to pick up, and now believe it or not, the Germans had 1,500 tons of gold on deposit, just Germany alone. They requested to have at least half of it or something of that sort opened up and given back to them, and they were told they could not even get an audit, a proof of the gold, until 2020. And that's their response to these countries that requested their gold out of the Federal Reserve, and that's what they were told, go away until 2020. Now, since then, my understanding is that a small portion was lent out, and there were certain financial agreements with the Federal Reserve System to assist them financially at the banking level in Europe. All right, but they never did get an audit, and they never did get anything like a large tonnage of their gold back in their own country.
So where did the gold go?
That's the big question. So then also, because the gold vanishing thing, that's always been that's been banged around for a long time. It's always discussion, but there's never been enough proof to where you could say, see that? Here's A, B, C, D, E. All of these things indicate that there absolutely is no gold left in the Fort Knox. And that absolutely is the correct assumption at this time, being as that they actually told these countries that they couldn't even have any of it. Okay, so I sit back, and I'd done so many things. I've been doing this full time for 30 years. Now, I'm not a guy that writes a blog or a guy that does newspaper stories for random papers or something like that. I'm not like a reporter or something of that sort. I've physically been in the middle of these inquiries, and some of the material that I have come across in my investigations, as a matter of fact, many pieces of paper, documentation that I have come across in 30 years, when I turned it to the investigating committees in Washington, D.C., they were classified secret after I had supplied it back into the desks of the investigations in Washington. So that's how important some of the material has been that I've done. I've had Chief Legal Counsel for the House Foreign Affairs Committee sit with me at his desk in Washington, and had him say, where in the world did you get your hands on the material that has come out of the safe or a vault in Washington, D.C.? Where did you get this material?
Now, probably something else you need to point out is you're not necessarily, at least before this came up, a prophecy student or a big believer in kind of fringe things. You're just a hardcore investigator, but you stumbled on something. What happened?
Absolutely. So I sat down when I really realized, again, what we were talking about in terms of a 10, 15, 20-year period of time, somewhere really actually about 1983 was when it started, when they changed the Space NASA started changing a lot of things in their budgets. This money was vanishing in gigantic truckloads of money. And again, I have to reiterate, it's not where somebody just took it, $2 million and built them a new house in Tahiti or Hawaii for a congressional vacation or something. It's not that kind of money. It was bigger. And I remembered somebody said something to me about underground facilities and had supplied me many years ago. Now I'm going back literally into the 92, 94 period of time, where I had gotten films and photos and stories and reports and information from people that had been either working on underground facilities. As a matter of fact, one of them became a pretty good friend, and he actually was murdered because he was talking about some of this. But they were talking about gigantic underground facilities way past and beyond, like the NORAD facility that we're familiar with, where they had in the side of the Granite Mountains, where they'd been in there for many years with the control center watching for possible invasions by missiles or nuclear attacks from Russia or something like that. That was what NORAD was originally created for, and they had all of their electronic gear in there and all that. So we're familiar with that and some other military bases. But the underground facilities that we were talking about, and I had I had never had opportunity, or never did I have a good reason to look into underground facilities until this new handful of information about vanishing gold and all the money gone, disappearing. So I pulled out some of my old records and information, contacted other people, and looked into what was going on in terms of underground facilities. And what I found out was, for at least 30 years, and some of them are even older than that, but basically since the 80s, Ronald Reagan, president at that time, had started what he said: we need to expand continuity of government programs. And that's what they officially labeled it as. And what that represents is the places for select people, a limited few number of people, that during a potential nuclear attack or situation like that, the president and a limited few people could be secured underground in these hideouts that would not be destroyed or affected by nuclear weapons, and that they could continue government underground if, in fact, we were attacked. And therein came the name of continuity of government. And that literally was presented on the floor of the Iran-Contra hearings that I was first brought in as a federal witness, and that was brought up by Congressman Brooks from Texas when he asked Oliver North at that time, who was being charged with lying to the Congress and all. He said, what is this business of continuity of government where we are going to suspend the Constitution of the United States and take a handful of unelected persons and hide them out and to run the government in case of some kind of an invasion or some sort? Well, as soon as he said just that much of it, he was gavelled down, told to shut up by Senator Inouye from Hawaii.
Right. They just called the whole thing classified and shut it all down. I saw that. Go ahead.
That's what he said.
Yes.
He said, you need to shut up about that,
right,
and we're going to go behind closed doors.
That's right. They immediately went to a sequestered session.
Right. And matter of fact, that was even the same day, by coincidence, that my business was brought up on the floor of the Congress, although they kept that. They did the same thing. They kept that secret, and that was the end of that. But so to get back to where we were, so now I remembered all of that, and I started looking really into it. Well, it ends up this, and that is it. We have now in the United States over 100 underground facilities. They are gigantic. They are beyond. There's something like they would be in a comic book. But I have actual footage, live footage, and photographs profusely of underground facilities throughout the country. All right, and we've interviewed people that have actually truck drivers that have gone underground. Let's use an example: gone underground in Texas and have driven all the way to Pennsylvania underground in their 18-wheeler, 40-foot truck.
Wow.
The highways are like spider webs under the ground in America. They're mostly interconnected. Some of these facilities are specialty designed for growing foodstuffs. Some of them are specifically designed for holding people. They are entire cities underground, sufficient to be self-sufficient for, they're all different sizes, but some of them for 10, 15, 20,000 people underground. They literally have excavated recently to where as many as 3,000 people can be underground beneath the Capitol building.
All right, now let me read two scriptures that ties this back to the Bible and Bible prophecy. Isaiah 2:19, and they shall go into holes of the rocks and into the caves of the earth for the fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty when he ariseth to shake terribly the earth. Revelation 6:15, and the kings of the earth and the great men, the rich men, the chief captains, mighty men, every bondman, every free man, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said, fall on us and hide us from the face of him that sitteth upon the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. That's what you're talking about.
Absolutely. And by the way, and I have, you can let folks know how to reach myself. But of course, I have my website, and I have just finished. It took 3 years to get this accomplished. It is a double DVD information expose. So no one has ever done this and put all of the dots, connected all of the dots, all the things that people didn't understand a couple of years ago. You will now understand that it's all going in one direction, and that is the return of Planet X, or Nibiru.
Okay, so you're saying there is a 10th planet that is out there. Now, tell us how you know that and how long it's going to be before it arrives, because we're running short on time.
All righty. What's happened was, again, like I said, I finally put it together. I realized that these underground facilities are gigantic. It even includes, by the way, the underground magnetic levitated high-speed train system. These are, see, it's interesting. In the United States, we don't have any of that. I think we have one or two of them for short runs, and those are magnetically the transmission. The engine itself is magnetic, and they levitate above the track system. Nothing even touches the track, and they can go to extraordinary high speeds. All over Europe, Japan, China, all these places, they all have these. They've had them for years. We've never really even built one above the ground. In the United States, we don't have any of that. I think we have one or two of them for short runs, and those are magnetically the transmission. The engine itself is magnetic, and they levitate above the track system. Nothing even touches the track, and they can go to extraordinary high speeds. All over Europe, Japan, China, all these places, they all have these. They've had them for years. We've never really even built one above the ground. But they have them underground in these facilities. There are no crossroads where these tracks are. People can get into them, and they will go, actually, I've been told they will go the speed of sound. They'll go 500 miles an hour and can be from one location to another underground, making hardly any noise whatsoever, and it's just zip, and then they stop, open the doors, and you're hundreds, if not 1,000 miles away from where you started. Anyhow, those are part of this underground system. We're just literally talking, get in it, sit down, close the doors, and zoom, they take off. No, there's no resistance whatsoever, not even wheels on tracks. They're levitated, and they just go zip, and then they slow down. It's like an elevator, except with no cables whatsoever. And you just get out, and you're in another state underground at a different facility. Okay, so what happened was then I started saying, I realized, for these people to be stealing literally all of this money, fraudulently transferring funds, and taking the gold out of Fort Knox, and taking all of this huge money from these different, like I said, they have space programs, and we don't, see, when they stamp these things secret and top secret, what a lot of people don't realize is that the senators and the congressmen, for the most part, are not cleared for top secret. So even a senator and a congressman, if he saw a piece of paper that showed X, Y, and Z as a black budget, and it said $320 million or $800 million or $500 million on something, if it's classified, they can't even ask about it. So, see, even your representatives, they have no idea of what's going on with this huge amount of money. Okay, so someone else had, of course, come to me on many, many different occasions, different people in the last 20 years, and they had asked me, what do you think about this Planet X? What do you think about this Nibiru going to come back? It's have you? They used to say, have you read Dr. Sitchin's books about the Sumerian clay tablets that talked about Planet X 4,000 years ago? And I thought, that was, again, it was one of these down things. And I was always polite, and I would say, well, gee, no, I don't. I'm not an astronomer. I don't know anything about that, but I'll look into it. So what I did was I did look into it, and I read the books by Dr. Sitchin, which talks about profusely clay tablets that he had been able to transcribe, and basically it talked about this planet coming by that is in a huge 3,000-year cycle, an orbit of 3,000 years, where it would go way out beyond Pluto and then come back in. It would take 1,800 years to swing back by and come close to Earth. And that was what had caused Noah's floods, the biblical stories of Noah's floods. And also around that same period of time, biblically, the storms of the raining down fire on the troops, killing 100,000 troops in Israel because of the rainstorm of meteors, which of course they didn't know they were meteors or meteorites at that time. What it was the tail of this planet, Planet X, coming close by. And when the Earth is in its regular orbit of going around the sun, we would pass through what would represent, let's say, the tail, like a comet. It's not a comet now; it's a planet. But like the tail of a comet, we would pass through it 2 times. One time, the first time when it came around the sun. Then when it would go back out again, we would again pass through that tail in approximately 150 days between number 1 and number 2. But additionally, this planet is described to be 5 times the size and density of Earth. That's big. And it also carries with it 3 or 4 moons that circle it on a regular basis, just going right around it like its own little solar system, so to speak. And then you have the tail that I was talking about, which is this horrendous amount of meteoric type material that coming in through the density of our own atmosphere become burning falling stars. And some of them would make...
Well, and of course, the Bible says that the stars are going to fall like a fig tree casting forth its untimely figs. Go ahead.
And that's exactly what we're talking about. This was one big study that had been done by one person. I really started to say, oh, wait a minute. See, the only thing... We have to realize something. We've had a corrupted secondary government running the United States of America for years and years and years. And it has gotten worse. It's gotten so totally out of hand. And originally, their intent, the bad guys in government, not everybody, but those that were corrupted and made their way up to government, at this point in time, if you're not corrupted, you can't get to the highest levels. There's very few people that are existing up there, I am afraid, that are actually good Christian, a wholesome, all-American people. So we've had this, what people refer to as a secret government running our government for years. You have to accept that, and that's a reality, and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to get into trying to prove all of those points. That's the fact. So what had happened, I started studying everything that I could, even some of it that I thought was completely crazy, junk, goofy stuff. I looked at that too, because if you don't look at everything, you're going to miss something. And the reality is there have been people, groups, organizations, scientific astronomers, et cetera, that have been looking and following this 10th planet for many, many years. Some of them have made an entire career out of simply investigating and pursuing it with scientific education that's above mine. And this is not my opinion. I had to utilize people that genuinely know what they're talking about. And one of the best investigators on this has turned out to be a fellow that depended primarily on the biblical background on this. And he looked into it, and he found out that the Bible, on a multitude of places, describes in Scripture and the writings and the studies of it, describes exactly what we're talking about. They're talking about events back a couple thousand years ago where it was literally a solar eclipse by a huge body that crossed in front of the sun, between the Earth and the sun, and blocked it off for 5 times the normal eclipse. It wasn't the eclipse by the moon. It was an eclipse by another separate body. One small point, going way, way beyond his studies, was that there's a thing that was called the sky disk that was discovered out of a German a geological survey that was done many years ago, and they discovered what was an astronomer's viewing site similar to the Stonehenge, and it was in Germany, in a country, part of the country of Germany called Gossec, Germany. And in 1999, they were doing these archaeological digs, and they discovered a thing that was called the sky disk, and it's about 12 inches across. It's made of bronze, and it was during the Bronze Age. It was done, amazingly now, it was dated at 3,600 years. Now, this has been approximately 3,600 years back, okay, was when it was created. And it describes, it's sort of like, the best way I can say it's kind of like a big dinner plate, and it's made of bronze, highlighted in gold, with like a lamination in gold. And the gold parts of highlighting is actually a picture, if you will, of what they were viewing that particular day that it was created. And it shows the eclipse of the sun, and it shows the moon and the sun at the same time in the sky. Now, the only way that can happen is, in fact, if it is an eclipse of the sun. Okay, you can't see the sun and the moon at the same time if you're just looking at it at nighttime. In other words, it's a daytime. And you could equate this, I think, the best way would be to say it's like a large drawing, but it's done on bronze, in bronze, and laminated in gold as the drawing. Instead of using paint or something else, they did it with gold because it was so earth-shattering for the people of that time who were watching the stars and keeping track of all the events in the heavens. Now, in today's world, we have computer programs that if you can definitively place constellations, the star locations on a program, if you put that into the computer, it will come back and tell you exactly when those stars and constellations were in that location. So you can actually go back and date it, not just give or take a year or two, but to the exact day that the stars and the constellations were visible in those locations. So they did that with this huge bronze disc that they had found, and they zeroed in that it was 3,600 years ago, and it was at 8:30 in the morning on a day in April. I think it was April 10th. April 10th, 3,600 years ago at 8:30 in the morning. Now, that's about as exact as you could get. And what we're talking about here now is a physical drawing, if you will, representing the passage of some type of a gigantic planet that caused the solar eclipse of that day. And not only that, but it indicates, because of the locations of specific constellations, that it actually tilted the Earth by 26 degrees. All right? Now, this is the kind of stuff that really takes some very high, intelligent, studious studies. Now, that's only that. All that is now, that's one example of one of the things that really excited myself, because it's kind of like a diary, a 3,000-year-old diary, where somebody said, hey, the day before yesterday, here's what happened, and everything went dark and blah, blah, blah. So now, to go past that, studies have been, they've gone in and researched, and for example, the Chinese going back 2,000-3,000 years, when this thing would come swinging by again, every time this would pass by, the Chinese, the Orientals, had astronomers working for the emperors a couple thousand years ago, and they literally tracked all of the stars. That was their job. They did day in and day out, probably 12 hours a day with their little pencils instead of their paintbrushes, and tracked all the stars to where they could actually track this thing coming in, and they would locate the location in the sky when it passed around, by a week-to-week basis. Now, apparently, taking a multitude of studies of these that I investigated myself, following, again, other people's work. And by the way, the gentleman that did this, I consider to be some of the very best studies on this, his name is Gil Broussard. And he calls himself an amateur astronomer, but he's been looking through the telescope for thousands of hours. He's probably got more time behind the telescope than some of the professionals. But now, let me shift gears. I just want to point out that some of his investigations, he went through every biblical passage and was able to verify, like this tilting of the earth of 27 degrees. Well, that would have meant that when that happened at that given time, that there would have been strange geological effects on the entire globe. So he went back into prehistoric studies, went back as far as he could, and matched up the biblical writings with the Orientals, the Tibetan monks, and all of these people that have been writing about these things, and by themselves they don't mean much. But when you get together and put all these together, he was able to verify that at the time that this was going on, that the volcanoes were blowing up all over the earth. There was earthquakes logged in on the old antique scriptures all around the globe. So it was affecting. So this 26-degree indication of this slant on the earth itself was actually documented all over the globe. And then we get back to modern times, okay? So the most recent, some of the most recent and spooky, so to speak, was a fellow named Harrington who was in charge of the Naval Observatory for the United States Navy, for the United States government. He had read some of Dr. Sitchin's books about the Sumerian description of a long, elongated orbital planet coming back to visit Planet X. He studied and looked at that, and he said, well, let me go see if I can find it. So what he did, and this was in the early 90s, Dr. Harrington located Planet X to his own belief, good enough that he contacted Dr. Sitchin and called him into his office. Now, we have videotapes of that meeting between the two of them when the guy that's in charge of the United States Naval Planetary, the Astronomical Planetary, he brought Sitchin in, sat him down, and said, I have found your planet. You're right. It is out there, and it will potentially be coming back, and et cetera, et cetera. He started to do what was a formal astronomical paper on this for the scientific community, and he all of a sudden came down with cancer and died before he could finish the paperwork. So fortunately, we have that on video, so we know that it took place. So here is actually the head of the Naval Observatory himself coming out and saying, I agree, Dr. Sitchin, you're right, it is out there. Now, more recently, as a matter of fact, we have had some scientists at the highest level of a couple of our universities just in the last couple of months and NASA has, has sort of admitted it only because, in fact, they've been located by what you would call serious sciences, so to speak, and astronomers. But and I'm trying to think of the anyhow, it's with one of the big universities with whom they work. All right, and they had found that there are at least, actually, they've discovered a couple of hundred planets that have never been seen before. All right, but in their case, the big deal was they found at least two out where Dr. Sitchin was talking about, past Pluto, out that far out, big enough to be the Planet X that everybody's talked about. And this is brand new news and brand new information that had just come out in the last couple of months. Now, here's to do a good summary on this now. And of course, everybody wants to know, well, when's it coming and how bad would it be, et cetera. This, according to the studies, the people that study it, and by the way, there are two different groups that I would say kind of are at odds. Some of them believe that it is a 3,600-year orbit, which would mean that it would come around, it'd take 1,800 years to get back once it's farthest point, and then 1,800 years to get away from here and go back way out in outer space. Then there are another group that feels that, including Mr. Broussard, who feels that it's only maybe a 360-year orbit, which would mean that it has passed 10 times in a period of 3,600 years. All right, and that the reason that there was this discrepancy is that there was a problem. See, there was many years ago, 1,000, 2,000 years ago, they did not use a zero in numerical writing any place on the face of the earth. There was no zero. They would use number, and then they would say plus number, to come up with, let's say, the number of 3,600 would have to be done by adding regular numbers together, but they would not utilize what actually was a figure for zero. That didn't come into place until a couple thousand years later. So therein, he feels that there may have been an error in that, and that's very, very possible. But the bottom line is simply this, that it is going to come back, and the belief is on its way back around. Now, it's already affecting our weather. It's already affecting the sun, which is affecting our weather. The sun has gone crazy compared to the way it normally acts. But what I discovered, and by the way, all of this is in my new DVD, everything, including much more than we can talk about today, is on my DVD, so you'll have a complete understanding and the exact figures on all this. I'm doing this off the top of my head, so it's not the best way to do it, but because there's too much involved. But anyhow, in terms of the planets.
So how do they get your DVD?
You get if you my website, which is bobfletcherinvestigations.com. It's bobfletcherinvestigations.com. You go to my website, and by the way, I've got pictures of the underground facilities on my website. I've got some pictures of possible infrared photos of Planet X already taken. So if you'll go to that website, bobfletcherinvestigations.com, and you can get the DVD. By the way, it's 2 DVDs, and it is 4 hours in total length. It's very tedious. You got to watch one DVD and then watch the other one. To do the whole thing properly, unfortunately, it had to be that long. That's all I want to put on that, but you have to get it. I am the only person that has done a compilation of this sort ever, and it is going to really set you back.
Okay, let me summarize this. You're saying, so you're in the middle of this Iran-Contra thing, and you're an investigator, and all of a sudden, you can't discover, or you can't explain why massive billions and trillions of dollars is disappearing. You do some research, come find out they're spending it on preparing underground survival facilities for government and high-ranking people. And that starts you on your investigation, and you turned all of this into these 2 double DVD sets, or
right.
this double DVD set.
Right. And see, the point was, what bothered me was, if you apply logic and common sense, even if you're talking about these bums stealing millions of dollars, you start applying common sense and things. And I had to say, what in the world? And by the way, there's an important point that I'm going to make right after this. I said, what in the world would make these people kind of stop on this New World Order stuff? See, they've been pushing that like crazy for 30, 40 years, 50, 60, 100 years in our faces, trying to take over the government, merge it into one big country, the whole world into a big la-la land that's controlled by a few people. But all of a sudden they backed off on that, and I couldn't figure out what would scare these people so much that they would build 100 underground facilities in America. What would scare them so much that they, for several years, going back a couple of years back, you'd only buy a limited amount of freeze-dried prepared foods, the underground, what you would call survival foods. It was a limited quantity. Some of the big companies couldn't even supply the retail request. And that was because the government was buying it all up right out in front.
Right, yeah, I can verify that.
Yeah, they were buying it by the train loads. And by the way, they have train tracks that run into the sides of the mountains of these facilities we're talking about, besides 18-wheelers. And in my DVD, I even show you how they drill and how they make these holes and where they are. I have a list of the 100 facilities. I have a list on my website. Now, let me get back to let's say the rest of it, so to speak, and it really isn't all of it, but that is that I discovered that every major nation on the face of the globe has been doing the same thing during the same period of time. Every major nation has been building underground hideout survival facilities. And the Chinese have utilized thousands of ancient tunnels that they already had going back to antiquity. 2,000 years ago, they already had tunnels underground like crazy because they used to use them during their own wars, et cetera, and protections of their own. The Russians also, in 2010 put out a regular governmental mandate that by 2013, the beginning of 2014, that they would have 5,000 underground facilities built for their people. And they have built them. The Russians have 5,000 of these. Now, let me make a big point. These facilities that I'm referring to in Russia are smaller facilities for a multitude of the general public and et cetera. Okay, they have several for their own upper level echelon, like they are built in the United States, because the ones in the United States are not for the general public. You're all going to get locked out when this thing comes around. Period. We're going to be locked out and stuck up on the top of the ground. But down underneath in Russia, they have one facility that will accommodate 65,000 people. And I have all of that in my DVD. I show you where it is, the name of it, photographs, pictures. I have photos of the Chinese underground facilities, the Chinese tunnels, and they have they have tunnels in China where they're actually storing entire battleships and submarines and aircraft. That's how large some of the ones in China are. So we have the whole world at the upper level of the governmental oversight building holes in the ground for their own survival. So, again, this was, when I finally realized this, I said, okay, well, there's no question, and they can say what they want to about Planet X. A lot of people say, well, how come I can't see it? Well, I don't want to get into all of that, but you don't see everything in outer space. And number one, this one does not generate its own light. It's not a sun, and it's not close enough to a sun to reflect any light at this point in time. So the only thing that works is an infrared telescope of either that's been sent out in outer space, which, by the way, we have a good handful of them that secretly out there that are infrared. But how about this one for those people that say, how about the religious side of it? The Catholic Church the Vatican built a few years ago, a huge infrared telescope in Arizona. It's owned and run by the Vatican, and it's called Lucifer. That's their name. That's their name for the huge telescope in Arizona.
So how long do we have before this 10th planet hits or comes near the Earth?
Okay, well, unfortunately, the bulk of the opinion is kind of broken down into 2 or 3 stages, but the most likely date, again, now this is not myself, these are experts that have been into this for a long time. The most likely potential earliest date literally will be next December of this year, of 2015, that it will be seen as an incoming star. It will take 4 or 5 months, and it will be closest to cause trouble in March and April, that period of time, the period of Passover. If it doesn't appear at that time, then the next, a little less likely, would be a year away at the next December through March period of time, April period of time, 1 year on. So it's either at the end of this year or 1 more year away. And that's because all of antiquity has recorded historically that that's when these events took place during the period of March and April. All right,
now let me ask you a question here, because it sounded to me like you said 3 dates. You said either the end of this year or March, April, sounded like 2016, or December, March 2017. Can you clarify, please?
That's correct. Well, what they're saying is the most likely is this next first sighting this December for 2015. That's correct, with the final close pass would be, of course, a couple months later, March and April. Or
March and April 2016, right?
That's correct. In other words, just take about 4 or 5 months for it to be December sighting, and then January, February, and then March and April will be in the backyard.
And then the third possible sighting could be December, March 2017.
Yeah, all of the figures would be from the December to the March and April period of time. So if it doesn't happen this year, it's not going to happen in June or July. Okay. It's going to happen in the next December to March.
All right, let me say this again clearly, make sure we got it right. Either latter 2015, March, April 2016, December, March 2017.
That's correct. And that seemingly is mostly agreed upon by all the people looking at it. And now here's the big deal that I have to, and we've run out of so much time here. I'm saying, I apologize. We'll have to get back. But a big deal is now that they have to have martial law in effect before the December sighting, by amateur astronomers all around the globe. They have to have a control factor of martial law, and that have to be probably, I'm going to say, at least 4 to 6 months in effect before the sighting. So when people see them moving into martial law, the real reason is Planet X is about 6 months away.
Do you expect a global announcement that this thing is coming?
Absolutely not. They can't do that, because people go totally berserk on this entire globe. So they will deny all of that when the rumors start getting really. They're already, just since I came out with my my DVD 2 months ago, the increase in activity on the websites globally is mind-boggling. It's triple, quadrupled in terms of material. Not all of it any good, but nonetheless it's there. But my point is, they cannot at any time, even after they have martial law, they're going to put martial law in because of a potential war with Russia, extraordinary terrorism across America, or the Ebola or similar disease. One of those three things will be the reason for the martial law. They're not going to tell people that it's because of the Planet X. And then once they have martial law, they'll end up going underground at the appropriate time. They'll all disappear and do synthetic reports from underground on television until the point in time when there is no television, because it's going to totally destroy all of our satellites. There will be no TV, no transmission of anything.
So you're saying this is connected to the end time. This is connected to Wormwood and Revelation and the 7-year tribulation, all of that.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, absolutely. It's all the same. It's all the same thing. So you have to realize when this thing comes in, we're talking. And by the way, we already have the volcanoes and earthquakes going like crazy. People, they're not reporting. Nobody pays attention. I mean, all you got to do is kind of look into it, but nobody does.
Oh, we're starting to pay attention here in the DFW area. We've had 36 earthquakes, in the last 60 days here?
Oh, yeah. The earthquakes are going crazy, and you just look it up, and you see that the numbers of them is mind-boggling. It was on NBC 2 days ago. They said, we talked about the volcano again, blowing one more time in Greenland, Iceland. Like crazy. They showed pictures, and then they said earthquakes taking place in Connecticut, which they never had ever in the history of Earth, for crying out loud.
I know that the Bible says that there's going to be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and upon earth the sea and waves roaring, and men's hearts failing them for fear for looking after those things that are coming upon the earth. And that word for perplexity, it means that mankind can't solve it. Now, I can understand something possibly from the earth affecting the moon. I can't understand how the earth could affect the sun, and I sure can't understand how it could affect the stars. The Bible says that the stars will withdraw their shining. Matter of fact, here, I got that verse. Let me just read it to you. Joel 2:10 says, the earth shall quake before them. The heavens shall tremble. The sun and the moon shall be dark. And here's the point. The stars shall withdraw their shining. Now, I can't understand how anything from the earth could possibly make the stars withdraw their shining, unless it is another planet out there that has a very high gravitational pull, so strong that as it nears the Earth, of course, we know that magnetism can bend light. So what if this other planet, this Planet X, Nibiru, whatever you want to call it out there, is so strong, the magnetism, that it bends the lights from the stars toward it, so that when we look up into the sky, we can't see a star shining?
There's combinations of things here now. This would have such an effect. First off, the potential of the gravitational effect, bending light, is absolutely a reality. Some of the stars that we see alongside the moon, all right, actually are behind the moon. A few of the stars that we see on a regular basis are actually behind the moon, and the light's being bent so profusely that we see them as if they were alongside.
So I think you're saying, yes, that theory is correct.
So I'm saying, number one, that is a potential. The other one is, in terms of the disappearance of the stars, is that we will have this will cause the volcanic activity in maybe, it's very difficult to kind of do a figure on this, but we only need 4 or 7 serious volcanic activities to block the stars for 6 months in terms of blowing stuff up out of the volcano itself. If Yellowstone blows its top over here, it will block the stars across the entire United States for possibly a year. So it's very likely the stars will vanish from our sight because of debris in the sky. Okay, just putting that in a rather a simplistic possibility for that. Okay, even forgetting the potential of gravitational effects, but we will have tsunamis that will take place, number one, just from the gravitational pull of Nibiru coming close. It will yank the waters out of the seabeds. But to add to that, we will go through, and by the way, we have this figured down exactly, and it's not my figures, these are scientific figures, that the Earth will travel through the tail of this potential, the passing of Nibiru, 2 times, 155 days apart, because that's how long it will take for it to make its journey around the sun and then back out again. We will go through it twice, and it will take 1 hour for the Earth to travel through it. This is going to be a tail filled with meteors. So we are going to have unbelievable meteor storms. One good meteor, just a small to medium-sized meteor hitting in the ocean will cause a tsunami that we've never seen in modern history. One of them. And we're going to go through this junk, space junk, for an hour. That's how long it will take to pass through it.
Let me give you another one. Isaiah 24:18 says, the windows from on high are open, and the foundations of the earth do shake. The earth is utterly broken down. It is clean dissolved. It moved exceedingly, and the earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard, and shall be removed like a cottage. And that cottage means like a excuse me.
Okay.
And that word cottage means like a hammock swinging in the wind.
That's right. Now, here is where we get back to what I had mentioned on one of the previous programs here, and that is that the Earth, on this thing called the sky disk, the Earth was seen and written down and logged in that apparently shifted 26 degrees in an instant, so to speak, 26 degrees on its axis. Okay, and again verified by historical writings during that same period of time, indicating all of this whole mixture of variety of geological effects that took place around the globe. They didn't understand what was going on, and they were thrown to the ground. But that's exactly over again what you just described, being shaken like, whatever the exact wording was. You might want to read that again about the shaking and movement of the Earth, because that's exactly what took place the previous pass, and that was logged in to the movement of 26 degrees on its axis. And I do quote in my during the end of the DVD program that we have showing all of this and the interfacing of everything, I do quote several of the revelations and bits and pieces out of the Bible that, in fact, absolutely fits the case.
Okay, let me read another one that is similar, but it's from a different place. In other words, further confirmation that what we're talking about is biblical. Psalm 18:7, the earth shook and trembled. The foundations, in other words, that's not talking about bedrock, but that's talking about the very foundations of the mountains, the sea. Anyway, it says, the foundations also of the hills moved and were shaken because he was wroth. We're talking about something that's really big hitting the earth.
And again, like I say, it was very, very specifically, mathematically described and analyzed that it was 26 degrees. And see what happened when it was tilted. The constellations in the sky over Germany, where they did this sky disk description of galactic events, those constellations, one of them was included on the disk that they saw that day. All right, now this was daytime, and again, seeing day, night, moon, and seeing it all at the same time. That the constellation shown was one that should not have been even seen in Germany. So when they went back on that day with the new programs, et cetera, with the computerization and did their analyzing of it, they realized that it was exactly 26 degrees of a tilt in order for them in Germany to see that particular constellation. And I think it was Constellation Orion, which normally is not seen in Germany. See? So for it to be seen, it was an exact 26-degree tilt to bring it up on the horizon far enough from their visible point of view to see it.
I've got one you're going to love here. In Psalm 18:15, you said that the waters would be pulled out of the oceans. Listen to this. Then the channels of waters were seen, and the foundations of the world were discovered at thy rebuke, at the blast of the breath of thy nostrils. So there's a time when the very foundations of the hills and also of the sea will be seen. That's what you're talking about.
Yes, sir. And I don't, other than I've done. Let me put it this way: I've done more biblical studies in my personal life the last 3 years, just getting into this, than I had previously.
Amen.
I mean, as a Christian, I was brought up, et cetera, under the basic concepts of Christianity my whole life. But I was not a biblical student. I never pretended to be. But maybe knew a little more than a lot of people, but not as much as others. But I certainly got into it with this, and when I saw it, I mean, like the quotes in the Bible where the kings and the queens and the wealthiest run into the mountains, the holes inside the earth, to hide away and close the doors behind them.
Right.
And that's exactly what they're doing, folks. They're building their holes, and they've got doors. Where do you see the footage that I've got on my DVDs? It's mind-boggling. These doors are 6 feet deep, for crying out loud. These are doors that are built with the equivalent of if an atomic bomb went off upstairs, it won't even affect these things, and that's the kind of underground facilities they have created for themselves.
When I was in Kansas City, I went to a fellow talking one night at one of the downtown hotels, and he told that he was the inventor of the underground tunneling machine, had a picture of it, all the drawings, explained all about it. And
here's how about Phil?
I don't remember his name, but here's how it worked. It looked like a giant bullet. Okay, it was shaped like a bullet. The front of it used laser, really, really powerful laser that shined out ahead of it and just fried the rock, and it just basically turned it to powder.
Oh, the tunneling. Okay, you're talking about the tunneling.
The underground tunneling machine, and then as it hit the front of the bullet-shaped object, that was heated by atomic power. It was so hot. And they said that this thing could go at 10 miles an hour, blasting through anything and everything underground, 10 miles an hour, making a road. And then as it cooled, of course, it was just molten, but as it cooled, then they didn't even have to put any concrete around it because it was a nice, round, smooth, clear, melted. In other words, the very part that was melted, that was blasted, became the edge.
Solid side.
Right.
Yes. All right. Now, I have all of that equipment you're talking about. I have all of that in the DVDs as well, and I explain it as well. Wait till you see the Chinese. The ones that China has been using are even bigger, and the ones that we are using now, I don't know when it was that you went to your meeting there, but the ones that they're using now are so large they can punch a hole, and also they're moving faster than they used to, that they can go right through solid terrain, whatever it is, and pull that back out, and they have a hole big enough for 18-wheeler, 40-foot trucks to drive right behind it, so to speak.
Have you been in any of these underground facilities?
Yes. The only one I was able to get into, I snuck in myself back a long time ago, back in 1995, in the underground facilities below the Denver airport.
So who are the people that get to go down in this in the time of trouble?
It's strictly the very upper crust, the wealthiest people, the heads and the leaders of all the biggest nations. Of course, and Europe, by the way, they've been doing it as well. So it's all the leaders, and then some of the top scientists and some of the most intellectual, et cetera. And they're not even sure how long they have to be under there. So it's interesting. It all might be, for them, it may turn out to be futile. There may be a big waste. Maybe they may have to stay under longer than they ever imagined. But since they're spending other people's money and they could care less about, they're rolling the dice that they will, in fact, survive.
Well, let me just continue reading what it says here. And I'm reading from Revelation 6:16, and it says that these guys run down into the holes and rocks, and they say, fall on us. They're saying this to the mountain. Here, I'll read it. And said to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him that sitteth upon the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? In other words, in my opinion, my interpretation is that's when Jesus returns.
They will be the ones that will find out, because the bulk of the persons at the highest upstairs, so to speak, on the surface, it'll be a huge numbers of people that are going to perish in this thing. By the way, see, they also have discovered with totally separate studies, astronomers can't figure out all of the planets starting out way back. They don't call them a planet any longer, but it's far out where Pluto is. All of the planets have been changing in the last year. And what I'm talking about is their temperature, the chemical structure on the surface, and all of these things that they actually measure with satellites that has been sent out there to do it, and to keep track of the orbits, etc. The orbits have all varied. They're jumping around, fluctuating. They're having storms that they've never had before on the surface of all the different planets. That's the effect already of Nibiru starting to push its way back from through what they call the Oort cloud, O-O-R-T cloud, way out. That's a cloud that actually surrounds the entire solar system. All right. So as it punches its way back in, another point, we've had more meteorites and falling stars, shooting stars. We've had more of that than we've ever had in 100 years. All right? All of these things are already direct effects of the intruding return of Nibiru. In Miami, Florida, as of a year ago, or 8 months ago, whatever, they had to start installing water pumps in Florida at Miami Beach because of the high tides today. The high tides in Miami are so high, they're coming in 4 to 6 blocks into the city of Miami Beach.
Than they ever have.
And so yes, and it's causing literally, it's like a daily flood, if you could imagine. So what they've done is they've spent multi-millions of dollars out of the state budget to put pumps in to try to aid in pumping the water out in Miami. That's already today. Now, where's that water coming from? It's coming from melting glaciers. The glaciers around at the highest and lowest points of the globe